Singapore is constructing something the world has never encountered before. Crews lowered 221 concrete structures, each the size of a 10-story building, straight into the sea. 1,000 driverless electric vehicles move around it. No drivers, no fuel, no emissions. Every other port on the planet looks nothing like this one. When complete, it will handle 65 million containers a year. More than any port operating today, at a cost of $20 billion, built entirely on land that simply didn't exist when the plans were first drawn. This is how Singapore holds onto its place at the center of global trade, one phase at a time. In 1960, Singapore didn't have a port worth mentioning. By 2005, it had become the busiest one on the planet. Then Shanghai overtook it in 2010. Singapore's answer was to build something Shanghai couldn't replicate. Container ships doubled in size, twice, over the following 20 years. And Singapore's older ports had been designed for smaller vessels. By the 2030s, Pasir Panjang would reach its limit. Singapore needed an entirely new port, but there was no land left on which to build a conventional one, so the country made its own. In 2013, Singapore made its defining decision: consolidate 5 separate ports into a single facility, the largest port on Earth. The design chosen was a finger pier layout, 5 piers extending into the sea, with berths running along both sides, squeezing maximum Why length out of minimal land? The project was split into 4 phases, spanning for decades. One continuous, uninterrupted build. Phase 1 is already running. Phase 2 is rising beside it. The Maritime and Port Authority builds the land and infrastructure, while PSA operates the port. Both working in parallel since 2015. Reclamation began in February 2015. The sea gave way, and a port began appearing where there had only been water. Sand was dredged from the seabed. Hundreds of millions of cubic meters pulled from the bottom of the strait, then pumped ashore, mixed with seawater into a slurry, and sprayed onto the site. New land rose out of the ocean. Wick drains were driven into the fresh sand to speed drainage and help the ground consolidate faster. Surcharge loading piled extra weight onto the new land to compress it and squeeze the water out. Ground that had been the seafloor of the Singapore Strait 6 months earlier was now solid enough to stand on. Phase 1 alone consumed 34 million labor hours and involved more than 450 companies, the largest civil contract in Singapore's history. The Maritime and Port Authority pioneered large-scale reuse of construction waste as fill material, saving 2 billion Singapore dollars in the process. Over 6 years, 414 hectares of new land emerged from the sea. Before the first caisson was placed, engineers prepared a level rock bed on the seafloor, since every caisson needs stable footing. Every square meter of new land was surveyed and monitored for settlement, ensuring the ground was stable before any cranes arrived. The reclaimed fill became working ground drainage systems installed, utilities buried, the land readied for construction. Before reclamation advanced across the reef, 800,000 square meters of coral and mangrove were transplanted elsewhere. Phase 2 reclamation began in March 2018. While Phase 1 construction was still underway, 2 phases proceeding simultaneously. Of the 414 hectares involved, 294 were entirely new land, created from the floor of the Singapore Strait. The seawall stretches 8.6 kilometers, with 414 hectares of land behind it, and the Strait of Singapore in front. The new land was raised 5 meters above sea level, engineered to withstand sea levels projected a century into the future. Power, water, and data lines were all buried before a single crane arrived. The port's underground nervous system installed first. The terminal pavement itself consists of 600 millimeters of engineered base built to carry automated vehicles around the clock, indefinitely. 221 caissons were manufactured on site in a temporary fabrication yard beside the sea. Each one measures 40 meters long, stands 30 meters tall, weighs 15,000 tons, and is hollow so it can float into position. Rebar cages were assembled inside the formwork, with each caisson containing more steel than a small bridge. Concrete was poured continuously without cold joints, since a marine structure can't afford weak seams. Pouring continued until each one was complete. Marine waterproofing was applied to every face because this concrete will sit in seawater for the next 100 years. Standing beside one, you're essentially looking down at the top of a 10-story building. The other 9 floors are submerged. Tugboats towed each caisson to its installation point, precisely navigating what amounts to a floating building. Survey teams confirmed placement. Within 50 millimeters of the designed location, ballast valves opened, and the caissons sank slowly and deliberately onto the prepared rock bed below. Divers verified the contact between base and rock at every point before sandfill was pumped into the hollow interior, making the structure permanent. It would never float again. A capping beam then tied the caissons together, turning individual structures into one continuous quay wall, growing section by section, with the sea on one side and the port on the other. By April 2019, the final Phase 1 caisson was installed, completing 8.6 kilometers of seawall. Phase 2 called for 227 more caissons each, again 30 meters tall, and the wall-building process began anew. By March 2026, Phase 2 reclamation had reached 80% completion, with 227 caissons forming 9.1 kilometers of new wall. Behind that wall, another 387 hectares are taking shape as the port expands westward into the sea. This wall consists of 48 individual concrete structures, each sunk directly to the seabed, with quay cranes running on rails built into its top. Those quay cranes arrive by sea, delivered on specialist heavy lift vessels, and are positioned on rails above the caissons, each one standing 50 meters tall with a 70-meter outreach, built to serve the largest container ships in the world and fully automated. Each crane uses a double trolley system. One side lifts containers off the ship, the other hands them off to an automated guided vehicle. 2 operations. 1 crane, 0 human hands involved. The crane operator sits kilometers away, with every lift guided entirely by camera, sensor, and software. A vessel 400 meters long, taller than the Empire State Building, is high, can be fully served here. Mooring lines remain one of the last tasks, still requiring human hands. Virtually everything else runs automatically. The spreader locks onto each container automatically, with sensors confirming engagement without any human guidance. Moving a container from crane to vehicle takes just 20 seconds, with no human involved on either end. A conventional port needs 5 to 10 workers per crane, diesel trucks, and spotters along the quay. None of that exists here. Berths are dredged to a depth of -23 meters, the deepest container berths anywhere in Southeast Asia, built for the largest ships on the planet. Berth 12 opened in 2025, with 4 more scheduled through 2026. Phase 1 is set to reach its full design. Capacity of 21 berths by 2027, -20 million TEUs a year, once fully operational, a volume larger than most entire world ports on its own. 3 cranes can work a single ship with no workers standing. On the quay between them, the area is essentially silent, apart from the machinery itself. Rails mounted on the caisson capping beam stay leveled 2 within 3 millimeters across 8 kilometers of quay. An anti-sway system continuously detects oscillation, with software correcting it in real time so containers land with precision. The target turnaround time is half that of a conventional port, since a ship only earns money at sea, not sitting at berth. Automation doesn't recognize the concept of 3 a.m. The port runs at full speed around the clock. Every day of the year, once finished, the facility will span 26 kilometers of quay and 66 berths, longer than Singapore's entire existing port network combined, served by 1,000 driverless electric vehicles, battery-powered, with no driver, no fuel tank, and no risk of human error. Navigation relies on magnetic nails embedded in the pavement, sensors mounted on each vehicle, and continuous position updates over 5G, Singapore's first private 5G port network, coordinating 2,000 vehicles and 1,000 cranes at once. At times, a single human may be the only person in an entire section of the yard, with every crane and every vehicle moving under software control. Autonomous trucks even platoon at the gate, driving themselves in convoy before internal automated vehicles take over at the threshold. Drones inspect every crane, using thermal cameras to catch problems before the crane itself registers an issue. A central control room oversees everything, with a single screen displaying every crane, vehicle, and container simultaneously. AI-equipped cameras scan every container passing through the gate, automatically detecting damage with claims processed before the ship even sails. In October 2024, PSA broke ground on a supply chain hub, a $647.5 million facility built to support the port's automation infrastructure. Charging bays for automated vehicles are installed at every yard zone, allowing the fleet to recharge between operations and remain constantly ready. A single controller can now monitor every crane, vehicle, and container across the entire port, simultaneously, something that has never been possible before. Phase 2, covering 387 hectares of sea, is being built right now alongside an operating Phase 1. Its 227 caissons are going in as we speak, forming 9.1 kilometers of new seawall through the same process, just at a greater scale. Phase 2 also includes a dedicated maintenance base, built before the cranes even arrive, so the workshop is ready the moment the machinery is berth dredging. For Phase 2 also reaches -23 meters, with every cubic meter removed by dredger before a single crane shows up. Some of the world's largest marine construction firms, Boskalis Hyundai, Dredging International, Pentocean, are all working on this single project. As of March 2026, Phase 2 reclamation sits at 80% complete, targeting full reclamation by 2027, after which construction begins in earnest. Planning for Phases 3 and 4 is already underway, extending the same process westward through the 2040s. In a single frame, one side of this port operates today, while the other is still under active construction. The same day, the same project. That's what Phase 2 adds: more piers, more berths, more capacity, and the same automated system extended further, with navigation nails already being laid in the pavement and 5G masts already rising. Once Tuas is complete, 5 existing terminals will close. 1,000 hectares of Singapore's waterfront will be returned to the city. Tanjong Pagar, Singapore's oldest container terminal, is set to close in 2027, with Tuas absorbing its cargo. That old port land will become city space housing, parks, and waterfront, giving Singapore back its southern coastline. The PSA supply chain hub that broke ground in October 2024 is a $647.5 million logistics facility built right beside the port. In one frame, you can see the port that's operating today, and just beside it, the port that will be operating by 2030. There are no diesel engines anywhere in the Tuas yard. Electric cranes, electric automated vehicles, electric everything. The maintenance building generates as much electricity as it consumes, powered by rooftop solar panels, achieving net zero energy use. Ships connect to shore power while berthed, allowing their diesel generators to shut down entirely, keeping Tuas's air clean. The transplanted coral is growing, with marine biodiversity recovering, even as construction continues around it, both happening at once. PSA has committed to reaching net zero by 2050, the same year Phase 4 is scheduled to finish, built clean from day one. Rainwater collected from the terminal pavement is treated and reused, closing the port's own water cycle. Beyond batteries, hydrogen-powered automated vehicles are already being tested as fuel for the next generation of construction phases. The port runs around the clock at the same speed and precision, regardless of the hour. Since automation has no concept of a night shift, the port never sleeps. The cranes never rest. The vehicles simply recharge and return to work, and Singapore's trade never stops. From open sea to functioning port, 12 years of construction condensed into a single, continuous build, 66 berths, 26 kilometers of quay, the largest container port in the world. By the 2040s, the site will cover 1,337 hectares, roughly the size of Monaco, built entirely from the seafloor, on an island that had no room left to spare. Phase 1 alone required 34 million labor hours, 450 companies, 221 10-story caissons, and 414 hectares of new land, and it isn't finished. Phase 2 is still rising from the sea. Phases 3 and 4 remain in the planning stages. The building never stops. Roughly 80,000 vessels pass through the Singapore Strait every year, and each one is a potential Tuas customer. Singapore itself covers just 280 square miles and holds 6 million people, yet ranks as the world's 4th wealthiest nation per capita, built almost entirely on trade. Once complete, the Tuas Port will finish off the Western Industrial Zone, tying together port operations, petrochemicals, industry, and logistics into a single connected system. Right now, containers are already moving through Tuas automatically, largely unnoticed by most of the world. A port is being built while it simultaneously operates. No country has attempted this at this scale before, and Singapore is doing it now. An island sitting at the center of global trade, with no land left to build a port on, decided to build the sea itself instead. Most ports look like organized chaos. This one looks like a machine, because that's precisely what it is. The world's largest fully automated port, under construction as much by night as by day. Singapore, as always, still building.